how do you change your thought so easily when a bodily emotion and the belief attached to that is so strong? Pujya Swamiji had spoken last night so much about changing our thoughts and about one thought. I'm gonna, since the question spoke about bodily emotions, I'm gonna take this from a sort of physical, neurological, psychological, and spiritual way together. When things happen in our lives, particularly when we're young, they impact us on various levels. They impact patterning in our brains. They impact even patternings in our bodies. And not only when we're young, throughout our life, we just tend to be much more impressionable when we're young, and when we're young, our brain waves are actually brain waves of being much more in a state of hypnosis and suggestibility. So we take things in much more deeply when we're young. But what we now know, what science and neurology are now saying, is the exact same thing that the saints and the rishis have said for thousands of years. So the questioner has said, how do you do this so easily when it's so deeply rooted in me? And that's really where our modern psychology thinks that it's at a divergence with ancient spirituality. But it really isn't. Because what neurology is now telling us, 20 years ago when I was studying neurology, we were told that basically the brain finished developing by late adolescence, and after that there was nothing else we could do. And that's why if you're depressed, you need antidepressants, you're anxious, you need anti-anxiety medicine, you've got this issue, here's a pill for you. Because we can no longer change who you are. All we can do is medicate it. So just like if you're diabetic, you've got an issue with insulin. Okay, well, you're depressed, you've got an issue with serotonin. Here's your insulin medicine, here's your serotonin medicine. But in the last 2 decades, neurology has come literally a complete 180 degrees and is now aligning very, very, very closely, almost exactly. Give it another few years and it'll be exact, with what spirituality has been telling us for thousands of years, which is, it keeps changing. In spirituality, we talk about the thoughts, the mind. In science, we talk about the brain. But the brain is just the organ of the mind. So without going into that in too much detail, I'll just quickly explain what I mean. That was actually a very good demonstration. Our ears, what just happened when that noise happened? On a physical level, the wave came, the membrane, the tympanic membrane at our outer ear started to fluctuate. That sent frequency vibrations into our inner ear. Those vibrations then went into the temporal lobes of our brain that said loud noise, grating noise. That's when we responded. When we all went, we didn't do that at the fluctuating of the membrane. We only did that once the brain had registered grating noise. The ears are the mechanism of the medium through which we experience sound. They don't create the sound. But nonetheless, if we didn't have ears, if we were deaf, we wouldn't have heard that, we wouldn't have shuddered. So we all understand that. That's the role that the brain plays. The brain is not the mind, and yet it's the mechanism through which, the medium through which we experience consciousness, we experience the mind. If you're brain dead, you're not able to experience all of the things that come through the brain. So, I mentioned this just very quickly because what neurology now has told us is we can keep changing our brains. Everything we do changes the brain. What that means is if I'm holding on to an emotion, if I have a set pattern, in Indian spirituality we talk about sanskaras. What are sanskaras? They're patterns. They're grooves, literally grooves in our way of living. If I've got, let's say this is kind of a board, and I pour a glass of water over this, the water is going to pour very evenly down. But now, if I take a key or a pen or my fingernail, and I start running it through, and I make a groove, and then I pour water, where does the water go? Where does the water go? In the groove, exactly. And every time the water goes in the groove, what happens to the groove? It's deeper. Yeah. So this is a physical demonstration of when we talk about sanskaras, patterning. In neurology, they say neuronal networks, neuronal patterns. In spirituality, we talk sanskaras. Same thing. But now imagine that this groove is my way of being. This groove is pain. This groove is anger. This groove is an addiction. Every single time I react with the pain, every time I react out of anger, every time I respond to the stress of life by engaging in the addiction, I'm just making this groove deeper. Which means that next time, I'm even more likely to feel the pain, even more likely to respond with anger, even more likely to engage in the addiction, because I just keep making this groove more and more deep. So every time the water of life flows, it goes into the groove. This is now what we call our personality, our emotions, our psychology. Okay, well, here's the beautiful thing. Compared to paper or a board, our brain is much more like a natural valley through which a glacier ran, water ran, it cut a groove, now we have a river. But over time, if there's no more water flowing, that valley will fill. And in the same way, over here, if I lay a new groove over here, so I start a new pattern, instead of responding with anger, I'm going to respond with compassion. Every time someone does something that hurts me, I'm going to immediately invoke compassion. Every time someone does something that hurts me, I'm going to immediately connect with my breath. Experience loving kindness for myself and for the one who hurt me. I start laying a new groove. And what that means is now when I pour water, more and more of it's going to start coming here. And slowly, slowly, this one starts to fill up. And over time, this now becomes who I am. So, lastly, to the asker of that question, don't allow yourself to get too brainwashed by what the Western models of psychology tell us about our stuck emotional state, about the patterns we have, about where we're holding on to things, all you have to do is start laying a new network, laying a new pattern. In 2 weeks of meditation, your brain changes. If you tie these 2 fingers together, take these 2 fingers together for a week, your brain will change. All of the science now is showing us how everything we do is constantly making and remaking, shaping and reshaping. Not just our minds, not just our emotions, but the literal physical brain through which we experience them. Now, with the 20-ish minutes, 22 minutes we have left, I want to just quickly move into our living harmoniously. And of course, if it keeps raining, we'll sit here until the rain stops. The theme for today is living in harmony with the environment. And it's actually not a very long topic, fortunately, because the minute that we commit ourselves to doing that, it's really very easy. The reason that we're not living in harmony with our environment is because we've developed what we spoke about last night, is this habit of trying to attain happiness and peace and fulfillment through things outside. Through purchasing, through consuming, through buying, through owning. And the more that my happiness, my peace, my sense of self and self-worth is rooted in what I own, I'm going to be a consumer. A beautiful environmentalist, Vandana Shiva, many of you may have heard of her. She's a very dear friend, a very great ally. She said something very beautiful recently. She said, you know, the word consumption, if you go back to the root of the word consumption when it first became a word, it actually referred to tuberculosis. Consumption is a disease. The root meaning of consumption is an illness for which you get hospitalized. And I loved that, because today what's happened is consumption has become a disease that may not be one of our lungs or a particular bacterial infection, but it's still an illness that is ravaging our world. And so in order to live in harmony with our environment, we need to make a commitment that says, I see the divine, as we've been talking. I see the divine in the world around me. I see the divine not just in the trees and the rivers and the animals, but in all of the people with whom I share this planet. And what that means is that my choices need to be in alignment with protection of them. And so, a few very quick things we do. Number one, we become a vegetarian. And we become a vegetarian not out of religious reasons, not even out of health reasons. I mean, the health reasons are a bonus. The fact that you become healthier by being a vegetarian is just a bonus. But we become a vegetarian because our earth can no longer sustain the meat industry. We become a vegetarian because the meat industry is the single greatest cause of climate change. It's the single greatest cause of environmental destruction. It's the single greatest deforester of the Amazon. We become a vegetarian because tens of thousands of children die of starvation every single day. And yet we actually produce enough food, enough grain, soy, corn, wheat, rice, to feed 10 billion people. 1.5 times the number of people on this planet. But that grain, instead of going to people, goes to the cows and the chickens and the pigs who later end up being our hamburgers and hot dogs and chicken dinners. So we become a vegetarian because we believe that our starving brothers and sisters are more entitled to eat at all than we are entitled to eat that which our taste buds crave. That there's an inviolable right to life that trumps my right to eat a hamburger just because I like the way it tastes, or to eat chicken McNuggets just because I saw a commercial that made them look really good. Second, we buy organic and fair trade as much as we can. Yeah, it's more expensive, I know. But we take money out of perhaps some other new goodies that we wanted to buy. Perhaps some movies we were going to go see, we rent them instead, or we watch on Netflix instead. And we take that extra money and we use it to ensure that we're buying organic. And this pertains to the food we eat. It also pertains to things like cotton. Yeah, you can buy t-shirts and sweatshirts and sweaters, non-organic cotton, a lot cheaper than organic cotton. But what that means is it says my right to cheap clothes trumps the right of those who work in the cotton fields to have a life that is not scarred by cancer, by respiratory infections, to have children who don't have birth defects, because of all of the pesticides and the chemicals that are being sprayed on the crops. And as we connect deeply with the divine in the universe, we understand that we all have equal rights. Unfortunately, these days we can buy almost everything we need organically. And what that means is that the land on which the cotton is grown stays clean and pure, which means that the water bodies, the rivers, the lakes, into which that groundwater flows stay clean. Which then, of course, means that all of the farms that are irrigated by those water bodies, by the rivers, by the lakes, stay clean and pure. And all of the people who are fed by the farms on the banks of these rivers and lakes now have food that isn't toxic. So see, it's all connected. I want to buy a cheap t-shirt. So the cotton farmers have to use the chemicals. The chemicals end up in their lung tissue, in their blood, in the soil, in the water, then in the fields, then in the food, then in the bodies. And we buy fair trade because what fair trade means is that the women, mostly, and the children who are working in sweatshops around the world to produce our items as cheaply as possible aren't taken advantage of, aren't oppressed, aren't working in unsafe conditions, aren't denied health care. And again, as I began, it's a little more expensive. Just due to what we pay at the cashier. But when we really look at the price tag, when the price tag includes healthcare, medicine, radiation, chemotherapy, oxygen, machines that we need to clean our water, all of the other aspects, it actually becomes a much cheaper way to live. To just go pure to begin with rather than having to spend all of the money to clean up the ramifications of that cheap price tag at the cashier. I'm gonna